Hi, and welcome to our conversation today. Joining me is Sharon McDowell-Larsen. Sharon is currently living in the Rockies in Colorado, but was originally from South Africa, has lived in Europe, lived in Central America, and as I say, has ended up now in Colorado. Sharon did her master's and doctorate at Lincoln, Nebraska. And interestingly, her doctorate was all to do with a very in the moment topic, and that was it was looking at exercise and the immune system, which is what we're going to talk about today, but in the context of leadership. Now, Sharon spent quite a lot of time with elite athletes, with the USA, the American Olympic Association, and more recently, she's been working at the Center for Creative Leadership, where she's been taking all of her knowledge about performance, about being an elite athlete, and helping elite leaders, what she calls corporate athletes. Now, other than all of that, Sharon is also a professional mountain biker. So it's great, Sharon, that you've come to join us today and have a chat. So tell us a little bit about what you mean by corporate athlete.
Yeah. Executives, I think, are similar to athletes in that they're very high performing creatures, and they put a lot of pressure on themselves to do well and to perform well. And I think the demands and stresses of leadership are also unique. They can be quite strenuous in a sense, but probably more from a cognitive sense than a physical sense. So in that regard, I think there's some similarities there.
So what are some of the things when you're working? I mean, you work with a lot of senior leaders, and obviously we'd like to talk about younger people as well, because they're facing, or they will be facing as leaders, all of the issues that we're looking at the moment, having to deal with COVID, global warming, the environment. But what have you noticed with the leaders that you work with at the moment about their cognitive function and either what they do or don't do in terms of their well-being, their health, their nutrition?
Yeah, I actually just submitted an article for publication looking at the health behaviors and exercise behaviors of senior leaders. And so they're actually quite good in some ways of taking care of themselves. Many of them exercise. Over 50% are actually quite consistent exercises. And from a cognitive perspective, of course, that's very, very important because we know that exercise is like fertilizer for the brain. It really fuels the brain and keeps it running nicely. One of the things they don't do well is eat well. So that's a large area of focus that we talk about in our sessions with executives, and particularly as it has to do with, again, brain function, because what we eat affects how our brain works just as much as how we exercise. And so that's a critical thing. The other thing where they tend to fall short, of course, is sleep, and a lot of long hours, a lot of disruptive travel, and so that tends to fall a little bit short. And also, they're quite good at not smoking. We don't see a lot of senior executives who smoke, and they don't tend to drink a lot of alcohol, which I think makes sense because you have a challenging job, and so you can't afford to overindulge.
And you and I both do a lot of traveling, or have done. So
Yeah.
what specifically have you noticed there? Because I mean, I know you and I meet people on planes, we meet people on programs, and I'm just amazed at the amount of distances up until obviously the lockdown that people have been traveling. So what were your sort of observations or thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, that's often, I think, a big challenge for leaders to stay healthy. And that's probably one of the biggest things they tell us is being on the road so much, it's more difficult to eat healthy. It's more difficult to get consistent sleep. For some, it's easier to exercise. For others, it isn't. And so I think that during times on the road that's when those health behaviors become substantially more important to focus on. And, even though it is more challenging, that's when it becomes more important to engage in those behaviors, for sure. Yeah.
So if you're advising or working with, say, people who are starting off their leadership careers, so people who maybe are in leadership roles, but perhaps not at the very top in either schools or colleges or businesses, what would be some of the things that you'd want to be talking to them about?
Oh, um, yeah, I think that when you're young, um, they say youth is wasted on the young. And so sometimes we can get away with perhaps not, getting enough sleep or eating well, or uh, we just have, you have more energy anyway. So, but, what we see, particularly from a cognitive function thing, and I think this is really key as you mature into your role and mature as a leader, is that the more you can engage in healthy behaviors, that the bigger effect that's going to have later on in life. And when we look at all the research on brain function and cognitive health, the advice is to start healthy behaviors now, because if you wait until your 50s and 60s, then it might already be too late. And so some of those long-term brain health concerns like dementia actually start in the 20s and 30s. And so the time to start engaging in health behaviors is in your 20s and 30s, even though, it might not feel as important to, have as much of an impact in terms of how you feel. But yeah.
I mean, I was listening to a webinar last week by Bob Johansson at the Institute for the Future, and he was talking about, the leadership competences, if you like, or the skills going forward. And one of the things he talked about was that he felt that leaders will need to be super fit. I'm just interested in you're someone who's super fit. Again, thinking back on starting early, starting young, thinking about one's fitness, what do we really need to be doing? We may not be superheroes, and certainly we're not talking about heroic leadership, but what are we going to need to be doing differently or doing more of?
Yeah, he talks about this idea of routine health versus extreme health. And I think most leaders that we see do have routine health. I mean, you have to have a baseline level of good health in order to be able to do the job, obviously. But he's saying that leaders of the future need to have more than just routine health, which I would define as the absence of disease. So you're not sick, therefore you are healthy. And he's saying that they're going to need to be extremely healthy. So extreme health, I think, has two sides to it. I think it suggests more energy, more vim, vigor, and vitality, so to speak, as you get older. But it also suggests that we significantly reduce our risk for diseases of aging or diseases of accumulation, like heart disease and diabetes and obesity and Alzheimer's disease. These are the conditions that plague us right now. And so again, the health behaviors that we engage in our 20s and 30s is going to have a significant impact as to whether we contract those conditions down the road. And right now, interestingly enough, this whole situation with COVID-19 has sort of brought this to the fore, because if you look at data out of Italy and data out of the US, what we're finding is that the people who suffer the most are people who have these underlying comorbidities or underlying conditions. And these are, for the most part, preventable, and even in some cases reversible. And so in order to achieve this good health, extreme health sounds like a very high bar. It sounds very attractive. I mean, who doesn't want to have extreme health, right? But it does sound like a high bar, but I think it's very, very achievable. I've seen people turn their health around and achieve this just by engaging in simple lifestyle behaviors. There's nothing sexy to this. There's nothing, there's no body hacks or superfoods. It's just, if you look at the research, engaging in, not smoking, regular consistent exercise, eating a health promoting diet. And in the research, the diet has to do with eating more whole plant foods, fewer processed foods, fewer animal foods, and not smoking and moderating alcohol intake. So those are the behaviors. And if you want to be healthy, you have to engage in healthy behaviors, right? And so it's quite simple, but I think that in the world that we live in, sometimes it's very counter to supporting these behaviors. And so it can be a challenge, but it's absolutely doable and critical, I think. even more so in this day and age.
So,
In this
just
time.
if you're not doing anything, start doing it, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you just sort of do status quo, and aging is not kind to anybody, right? But I think that you don't, and I think as a culture, often, particularly in Western cultures, we tend to fear the aging process. But if you engage in these healthy behaviors, you can embrace the aging process. And there's lots of benefits to being older, perspective and wisdom and all of these things and knowledge. But unless we stay healthy as we get older, it is a thing to be feared. Yeah.
So if you were sitting in front of some, I don't know, young leaders in their late 20s, early 30s, all bright, well-educated, got good jobs, and you were looking at them and saying, well, what could I do to make the difference? What could I say to them that might make the difference? Between just being a really good leader, but they get to a point where, maybe they're not the brightest, spark in the room or whatever. What would you be saying to them? What advice would you be giving them? What sort of 2 or 3 things might you share with them?
Actually, I was just in that situation in London about a month right before this whole stuff broke, talking to a group of young people. And, I think everybody's, wants to be healthy. Nobody wants to be sick. And so everybody has a keen interest in this. But yeah, I mean, again, it's very simple. Exercise to get fit and be fit. And it doesn't take a lot. It's more about consistency, doing stuff every day, moving more, getting outside, getting some dose of nature as well is good. Eating a more kind of plant-based, whole foods, plant-based diet. And being consistent on your sleep. I mean, I think if your sleep is messed up, that's a good place to start, is like fix the sleep thing first. Yeah. And what's cool is that these are all interconnected. And so when we don't sleep well, we're less likely to eat well, and we're less likely to exercise. So they all kind of, you can create a downward spiral or a positive upward spiral in terms of some of these behaviors. And sometimes when you change one thing, like your diet or your sleep, then it positively impacts another aspect of your life. But yeah, it just goes back to lifestyle behaviors and being, a lot of these are just common sense as well, right? We kind of know this stuff, but I think we get a lot of mixed messages that says otherwise. And here's the secret way to weight loss. It's not about weight loss. It's not about losing weight. It's about engaging in healthy behaviors for the sake of improved health. And if weight loss happens, great. If it doesn't, you're still better off. Yeah.
And coming full circle back to, what you've spent a lot of time doing and looking at particularly at cognitive function. I mean, when those things aren't in place, people looking after themselves, not being super duper athletes, but just taking care of themselves, getting plenty of sleep, eating well and healthily, and then not doing that, what have you noticed about cognitive function later in life, and particularly when it comes to decision making? They're in difficult situations in organizations and companies facing challenges. Anything that you've noticed, if those sort of things aren't part of someone's makeup, aren't part of someone's lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, it affects it in so many different ways. And if you look at the research on exercise and cognitive function, it affects our ability to process information very quickly.
Right.
And that's a key thing in this environment where so much is coming at us. It affects our ability to be creative and think outside the box. Yeah. It affects our ability to be quick and think on our feet. And food does as well. So if you look at, if you eat up a lot of fat, for example, in your diet, all of a sudden that slows down the blood flow. There's something called blood clumping, or where the red blood cells start clumping together, and the research shows you just can't think and function as well cognitively. And so, yeah, you really suffer as a result. I've probably seen more people say when they've made the change, they'll say things like, I feel like a fog is lifted from my brain. I feel like I can think so much more quickly and so much more clear. I notice things. It's almost like I had one person say it's like all of a sudden things started to come in more focused, to better focus for them cognitively. And so these are just what I hear back from executives that have kind of changed their diets and lifestyles and started to exercise and things like that. So it's noticeable. People notice it. Yeah.
So really, really important, particularly given what we're facing at the moment and what we're going to face coming out of this. There'll be lots and lots of leaders having to make really tough decisions. And presumably the fitter and healthier they are, the better those decisions are going to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the hopes for a positive outcome from the situation, is that there will be a greater focus on how we can be healthier in a general sense, not just in terms of fighting this virus, but just overall, because it does lessen the risk for sure. Yeah.
Sharon, it's been great talking to you. Thanks so much for your insights. As always, it's a joy, because you and I have worked together on occasions. And anyway, so what have you got planned for the next few days?
We're actually visiting Bend, Oregon, so we're going to go and mountain bike the trails as much as possible and get away. You know, we live in Breckenridge, Colorado, which still has 2 feet of snow. So we wanted to get on some dirt and run some trails and mountain bike and enjoy the outdoors. So
great. Well, have a super time, and thank you very much indeed. Cheers.
Thank you, Matt.
Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.